In the forgotten mining town of Pinecrest, nestled deep in the Appalachian mountains, stands the Evergreen Hotel, a once grand establishment now reduced to a creaking, frost-bitten shell of its former glory. When 23-year-old Elijah Harmon purchases the dilapidated structure for $1, the townsfolk can barely contain their laughter. With calloused hands and unwavering determination born from a lifetime of mountain hardship, he begins the seemingly impossible task of restoration. On a bitter winter evening, as Elijah pries up warped floorboards in what was once the grand ballroom, his crowbar strikes something hollow. A faint golden glow seeps through the cracks, illuminating his weathered face. What secrets has the old hotel kept buried all these years? The toolbox sat heavy in Elijah's calloused hands, its pine surface worn smooth by 3 generations of Harmon men. Each dent and oil stain told a story of mountain resilience. He set it down on the warped reception counter and looked around at his dollar investment. Sunlight filtered through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the cold air of the Evergreen Hotel lobby. Paint peeled from the walls like autumn leaves, and the grand staircase listed dangerously to one side. The place smelled of mildew, forgotten dreams, and something else, possibility. "You're your father's son, that's for certain," Elijah muttered to himself, running a hand through his thick brown hair. Samuel Harmon had been known throughout these mountains as a man who could see value where others saw only ruin. Before the mining accident took him and Elijah's mother 8 years ago, he'd taught his son that patience and craftsmanship could transform anything. Elijah removed his worn leather wallet and extracted a folded piece of paper, his parents' will with a single paragraph, highlighted. "To our son, we leave not wealth, but wisdom. Find the beauty others cannot see. Rebuild what time has forgotten. And always believe in the worth of your own 2 hands." Outside, a truck engine rumbled to a stop. Elijah glanced through the window to see Hank Miller, owner of the town's only hardware store, shaking his head as he approached the entrance. "Thought I'd find you here," Hank said, stomping snow from his boots as he entered. His eyes scanned the decay. "Son, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper, so I'll speak plain. You've wasted your dollar." Elijah smiled. "Maybe so. This place has been rotting for 40 years. Town council's been trying to offload it since before you were born. They're laughing themselves silly that they found some fool to take it." "I expect they are." Hank sighed. "Your grandpappy built half the cabins on this mountain. Your daddy restored the old church when lightning took it. That was honest work. This," he gestured around, "this is a money pit that'll swallow everything you've saved fixing folks' porches and mending roofs." "Appreciate your concern," Elijah said, opening his toolbox and removing a hammer with a handle his grandfather had carved. "But I've got time in these." He held up his rough hands. After Hank left, Elijah climbed the creaking stairs to what had once been the master suite. He'd brought only essentials: a sleeping bag, lantern, camp stove, and a duffel of clothes. The room was large, but felt close, with furniture draped in yellowed sheets, like silent ghosts. He crossed to the window and looked out at Pinecrest, once a bustling gold rush town, now just a cluster of buildings huddled against the mountainside, slowly surrendering to time and economic hardship. The mine had closed in the 1950s, and the younger generation had been leaving steadily ever since. Night fell quickly in the mountains. As darkness claimed the valley, Elijah sat on his sleeping bag, eating beans heated on the camp stove, his lantern casting long shadows. "What am I really doing here?" he whispered. The old hotel seemed to answer with a distant creak. Since childhood, Elijah had been drawn to the building, its weathered grandeur, the stories of its heyday when gold flowed and the ballroom echoed with laughter. When the council announced they were considering demolition, something in him couldn't bear the thought. He pulled out a small notebook containing careful calculations of costs and time, a 5-year restoration plan that would consume every penny he'd saved and every hour not spent on paying jobs. The numbers didn't lie. This was madness. But as he drifted towards sleep, he remembered his father's words, "Mountains don't give their treasures easily, boy. You've got to believe they're there." Morning brought pale winter sunlight and renewed determination. Elijah began a methodical assessment, room by room, listing repairs from critical to cosmetic. The structure remained surprisingly sound, built by men who understood mountain winters and heavy snowfall. In the kitchen, he discovered an old cast-iron stove, rusted but intact. In a pantry, preserved mason jars stood in neat rows, their contents long since spoiled. Each discovery was like turning pages in a forgotten book. By midday, whispers had spread through town. 3 teenagers peered through the windows until Elijah invited them in. They seemed disappointed to find him just measuring and making notes, rather than uncovering buried treasure or encountering ghosts. "My gran says this place is haunted," said one boy. "If it is, the ghosts have been respectful so far," Elijah replied with a smile. As evening approached again, he found himself drawn back to the ballroom where he'd made his discovery the previous night. The floorboards still lay pried open, revealing the strange golden glow that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat from the darkness below. Elijah awoke with a start, his breath visible in the frigid air. Something had disturbed his sleep, a sound unlike the normal settling of an old building. He sat perfectly still, listening. There it was again, a faint scratching, like fingernails dragging slowly across wood, coming from within the walls. He reached for his flashlight and swept the beam across the room. The noise stopped immediately. "Just mice," he muttered, unconvincingly. But as he prepared a simple breakfast, the hotel seemed to exhale around him. Drafts appeared from nowhere, cold spots that made no sense given the building's layout. Twice he felt the distinct sensation of being watched. By mid-morning, hunger and the need for human contact drove him to town. The Pinecrest diner stood as it had for 60 years, a silver tube of a building with windows frosted by grill steam. A bell jangled as Elijah entered, and 6 pairs of eyes turned to assess him. "Well, if it isn't the new hotelier," called Bernie from behind the counter. "What'll it be?" "We're fresh out of paying guests." Laughter rippled through the diner. Elijah smiled good-naturedly as he slid onto a stool. "Coffee and whatever's hot, Bernie. Heard you spent your first night in that fire hazard," said Frank Miller, the retired postmaster. "Surprised you didn't wake up with the roof in your lap." "Structure's surprisingly sound," Elijah replied, warming his hands on the mug Bernie slid toward him. "Good bones. Lot of stories in those bones," came a gravelly voice from the corner booth. Elijah turned to see Margaret Sullivan, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp eyes peering over reading glasses. The town's unofficial historian was surrounded by books and notebooks. "Ma'am?" Elijah asked. "That hotel," she clarified, gesturing for him to join her. "Built during the gold rush by Augustus Blackwood. Made his fortune overnight, that one." Nobody quite knew how. Elijah carried his coffee to her table, intrigued. "What happened to him?" "Vanished in 1889, after the incident." She studied him carefully. "You don't know the stories, do you, boy?" Before she could elaborate, the bell jangled again. A young woman entered, her cheeks flushed from the cold. Dark curls escaped from her wool hat, and a camera hung around her neck. "Miss Pearson," Bernie called. "Your usual?" "Please," she replied, unwinding her scarf. Her gaze landed on Elijah, curiosity evident. "Hannah Pearson," Margaret said, "writes for the county paper, fancies herself the next Nellie Bly." "Hannah, meet Elijah Harmon, our town's newest investor." Hannah slid into the booth beside Margaret. "You're the one who bought the Evergreen dollar deal, right?" Elijah nodded, suddenly self-conscious under her direct gaze. "Mind if I ask why?" "Hannah," Margaret chided, "the boy just met you." "It's all right," Elijah said, Truth is, I'm not entirely sure myself. My family's always restored things, furniture, houses. That building's been standing there my whole life, watching over the town. Seemed wrong to let it fall. Hannah's expression softened slightly. Mind if I do a piece on your project? Local interest story. Not much to tell yet. Oh, I think there will be. Margaret interjected mysteriously. Later, as Elijah returned to the hotel, Hannah fell into step beside him. Margaret's not one for idle talk, she said. If she's interested in your hotel, there's something worth knowing. You believe in all that? Ghost stories and hidden treasures? I believe in history, she replied, and history's full of things people tried to bury. Back at the Evergreen, Hannah photographed the exterior while Elijah resumed his work, methodically removing rotted wood from a section of wall. His crowbar dislodged a chunk of plaster, and thin metallic tumbled to the floor with a clink. He knelt and brushed away debris, revealing an ornate brass key. Its bow formed in an unusual pattern. The room number 27 was engraved on its surface. Found something? Hannah called from the doorway. Elijah held up the key. Room 27. Second floor, I think. They located the room door, swollen with dampness, its brass number tarnished nearly black. The key entered the lock stiffly, but turned with a heavy click. Inside, the room appeared untouched for decades. This is weird, Hannah said, running a finger through the dust on a dresser. No footprints, no signs anyone's been in here. But what? Look at the bed. The covers were turned down neatly, as if prepared for a guest. On the pillow lay a single penny, dated 1889. The year Blackwood vanished. Elijah whispered. Hannah's camera clicked in the silence. As if in response, a long, drawn-out creak sounded from somewhere within the walls, followed by what might have been a whispered word. They exchanged glances. Neither was willing to suggest what they both had heard. A voice, faint but distinct, saying, "Welcome." The following afternoon found Elijah and Hannah seated in Margaret Sullivan's small cottage, surrounded by leather-bound books and yellowing papers. Outside, snow fell in gentle flurries, adding another layer to the already white landscape. "Augustus Blackwood," Margaret said, placing a fragile newspaper clipping on the table. "Arrived in Pinecrest in 1883, when the gold rush was already fading. Within 2 years, he'd built the grandest hotel these mountains had ever seen." The clipping showed a stern-faced man with a thick beard and penetrating eyes. He stood before the newly completed Evergreen Hotel, ribbon freshly cut. "How'd he get the money?" Hannah asked, scribbling in her notebook. "You said the rush was fading. That's the question, isn't it?" Margaret's arthritic fingers carefully opened an old ledger. "Official story was that he struck a rich vein, but there's no record of any claim filed in his name. Could have bought someone else's claim," Elijah suggested. "Perhaps. But that same year, 1885, something peculiar happened. A gold shipment vanished between Pinecrest and Denver. 6,000 ounces worth millions in today's money." Hannah looked up sharply. "You think Blackwood stole it?" "I'm saying the timing is curious, and he wasn't alone in his sudden prosperity." Margaret produced another document. The hotel's first registry shows a particular group, 7 men who met regularly in the private dining room. They called themselves investors. "Names?" Hannah pressed. "Blackwood, of course. Judge Pierce, banker Thomas Holcomb, Sheriff Davis, Reverend Stillwell, Mason, and mining inspector Gerald Cooper." She tapped each name. Within 3 years, they controlled everything in Pinecrest. Elijah frowned. "Holcomb, Cooper, these are still names around here." "Indeed. Raymond Holcomb owns half the county now. His bank holds most folks' mortgages, and our current Sheriff Cooper is Gerald's great-grandson." Hannah's pen paused. "Margaret, are you suggesting some kind of conspiracy that's continued for over a century?" The old woman shrugged. "I'm just telling you what I know. In 1889, there was what they called an incident at the hotel, shortly after Blackwood vanished. The hotel closed for a time, then reopened under new management. But it was never the same. As the mines dried up completely, so did the guests. What was the incident? Elijah asked. Records are surprisingly sparse. A fire, officially, but my grandfather told different stories. As Margaret rose to fetch more documents, Elijah noticed a loose baseboard near the fireplace, slightly ajar. Your house settling, Margaret. She glanced over. Been meaning to fix that. Old houses talk to you if you listen. She gave him a significant look. Just like your hotel. When Margaret disappeared into her back room, Hannah leaned closer to Elijah. She knows more than she's saying. Elijah nodded and moved to examine the baseboard. Something in Margaret's tone had sparked his craftsman's instinct. He pressed gently and the wood slid sideways, revealing a small cubbyhole. Elijah, you shouldn't, Hannah began, but stopped when he carefully extracted a brittle envelope. Inside was a sepia-toned photograph. 7 men in formal attire stood before the hotel, Blackwood at the center. The others arranged around him in what seemed almost a ceremonial formation. Each wore a small pin on their lapel, a circle with what looked like a compass inside. Found something interesting. Margaret had returned. Unsurprised. I'm sorry, Elijah said, extending the photo. I shouldn't have pried. You have a gift for finding what's hidden. She took the photo, studying it with a wistful expression. They called themselves the Golden Circle. Not just businessmen, something more. My grandfather was a miner. He said Blackwood and his circle weren't just after gold, but power. They controlled who found claims, who kept them, who processed the ore. Hannah pointed to the pins. A secret society, of sorts. Mountain folk have long memories, Miss Pierce. Some say the circle didn't end with Blackwood's disappearance. It just went underground. As dusk approached, Elijah and Hannah prepared to leave. At the door, Margaret gripped Elijah's arm with surprising strength. Be careful in that hotel, young man. Some secrets don't want finding. Back at the Evergreen, Elijah found his tools neatly arranged on a workbench, not where he'd left them scattered the day before. Did you come by earlier? He asked. Hannah. No. Why? He gestured at the tools. Hannah's expression changed from confusion to unease. Maybe someone from town is helping out, she suggested without conviction. They both knew the hotel had been locked, the only key in Elijah's pocket. Neither mentioned the arrangement of the tools placed precisely as they would have been in Augustus Blackwood's day, according to the old photographs they'd seen. That night, alone in his sleeping bag, Elijah was certain he heard footsteps pacing methodically in the ballroom below. Precisely 13 steps, a pause, then 13 more over and over, until dawn. The grand ballroom of the Evergreen Hotel had once hosted the elite of Western society. Now, its faded glory surrounded Elijah as he meticulously mapped the floor, measuring tape in hand, comparing his findings to the blueprints Hannah had obtained from county records. This doesn't make sense, he muttered, marking another measurement in his notebook. Hannah looked up from photographing ornate crown molding. What's wrong? According to these blueprints, this section of flooring should be uniform. He tapped a weathered floorboard with his boot. But there's a pattern here, subtle, but intentional. She joined him, crouching to examine the wooden planks. Indeed, upon closer inspection, the ballroom floor revealed a complex arrangement, certain boards, a fraction wider, others with grain running perpendicular, forming what might be a geometric design visible only to the observant eye. Could be decorative, Hannah suggested. Elijah shook his head. Craftsmen don't waste effort, especially not in 1885. This was deliberate. The sound of tires on gravel interrupted them. Through the grimy windows they watched a black SUV pull up, its glossy finish stark against the weathered hotel exterior. A distinguished man in his 60s emerged, followed by a younger, broader companion whose suit barely contained his muscular frame. Raymond Holcomb, Hannah whispered. The banker Margaret mentioned. Don't know the other one. Moments later, a firm knock echoed through the lobby. Elijah opened the door to find Holcomb's practiced smile. "Mr. Harmon, Raymond Holcomb. I've been meaning to introduce myself." His handshake was dry and firm. "This is Victor Mercer, my associate." Victor nodded curtly, his eyes surveying the interior with unsettling intensity. "What can I do for you, Mr. Holcomb?" Elijah asked. "Please, Raymond, I understand you've acquired this beautiful piece of history." Holcomb stepped inside without invitation. "I've always had a soft spot for the Evergreen. My family has historical connections." "The Golden Circle," Hannah said, emerging from the ballroom. Something flashed in Holcomb's eyes, surprise, perhaps, irritation, quickly masked. "Ah, Miss Pearson from the Gazette. Still chasing colorful local legends." "History isn't legend, Mr. Holcomb." His smile tightened. "Indeed. Well, Mr. Harmon, I'll be direct. I'd like to make you an offer for the property, something more substantial than your dollar investment. It's not for sale. Come now, a young man like yourself could use capital for more practical ventures. I'm thinking 50,000, generous for a condemned structure." Elijah felt Victor's eyes boring into him. "I appreciate the offer, but I've already started restoration." Holcomb sighed, admirable but financially unsound. "The town council is reconsidering their hasty sale. There are safety concerns, meaning structural integrity, fire hazards, insurance liability, technical matters that could become burdensome." Holcomb produced a business card. "Think it over. My offer stands for 1 week." After they departed, Hannah exhaled sharply. "That wasn't subtle." "No," Elijah agreed. "But why now? The hotel's been empty for decades." "Maybe because you're the first person who's actually looked beneath the surface." That evening, as sunset painted the mountains copper and gold, Elijah discovered something unusual behind a rotted section of wainscoting, a small brass object. He cleaned it carefully, revealing an elaborate compass with unusual markings. Instead of north, south, east, west, it bore symbols matching those from the photograph of the Golden Circle. More curious still, when placed on different sections of the ballroom floor, the needle behaved erratically, spinning wildly in some spots, pointing resolutely toward others, never indicating true north. "It's responding to something underneath," Elijah realized. As darkness fell, he continued testing the compass across the ballroom floor, marking spots where the needle showed the strongest reactions. Gradually a pattern emerged, a path leading to the center of the room, where the hollow sound had first drawn his attention. Exhausted, Elijah finally retired to his makeshift bed upstairs. Sleep came quickly, but sometime in the deepest part of night, he jolted awake. A soft golden glow pulsed from beneath his door. He crept down the corridor and peered over the balcony rail into the ballroom below. The pattern in the floor, invisible during daylight, now glowed faintly, lines of golden light tracing the very path he'd mapped with the compass. At the center, a circle of light pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, as if sensing his presence, the illumination faded, plunging the room into darkness. Elijah fumbled for his flashlight, rushing downstairs, but by the time he reached the ballroom, the phenomenon had vanished completely. The next morning, Hannah found him removing floorboards at the center of the pattern. "Another sleepless night?" she asked, noting the shadows under his eyes. "I saw something," he replied, explaining the ghostly illumination. She looked skeptical, but helped anyway. By midday, they had exposed a section of subfloor, unlike the rest. Not rough pine, but finely crafted hardwood with inlaid symbols matching those on the compass. "There's definitely something beneath us," Elijah whispered, tracing the intricate patterns with his fingertips. "And I think Holcomb knows exactly what it is." The county records building stood at the edge of town, a squat brick structure that seemed to hunch against the winter wind. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed over metal filing cabinets and dust-covered boxes. "Most of this should be digitized," Hannah grumbled, wiping cobwebs from another ancient ledger. Elijah shrugged. "Some things are meant to stay on paper." They had arrived at opening time, armed with a list of questions about the Evergreen Hotel. The clerk, a bespectacled woman named Dorothy, had directed them to the historical property records with obvious surprise at their interest. "Been decades since anyone looked at those," she'd remarked. 4 hours later, surrounded by building permits, tax records and survey reports, Hannah's frustration was mounting. This makes no sense. According to these records, the hotel was renovated in 1890, after Blackwood disappeared. What kind of renovation? Doesn't say specifically, but the work took 6 months and cost more than the original construction. She frowned at a water-damaged blueprint. And look at this, the original plans show 5 floors, but the current building only has 4. Elijah studied the faded drawing. Maybe they abandoned the top floor, sealed it off, or maybe they added something below, Hannah suggested, tapping the compass in Elijah's pocket. A shadow fell across their table. Sheriff Cooper, a weathered man in his 50s, stood watching them with narrowed eyes. "Miss Pearson, Harmon," he nodded curtly. "Doing some research?" Hannah straightened. "Just learning about the hotel's history, Sheriff." "Public record," Elijah added. Cooper's gaze lingered on the blueprints. "That old place has quite a past. Shame to see it sitting empty all these years." His tone suggested otherwise. "Heard you turned down Holcomb's offer. Word travels fast." "Small town." Cooper adjusted his belt. "Just be careful digging up the past, son. Some things are buried for a reason." After he left, Hannah whispered, "That wasn't subtle." "No," Elijah agreed, "but it confirms we're onto something." By late afternoon, they had discovered several inconsistencies. The hotel's deed had changed hands mysteriously after Blackwood's disappearance, transferring to a company called Pinecrest Development Trust, whose shareholders included the familiar names from the Golden Circle. More telling was what they couldn't find. Detailed plans for the 1890 renovation, records of building inspections from that period, or any mention of the incident Margaret had referenced. As they prepared to leave, Dorothy approached with an envelope. "Nearly forgot. These were requested by someone years ago, but never picked up. Since you're interested in the Evergreen," she handed Hannah a set of photographs from the Historical Society. The images showed the hotel in various stages of its existence: grand opening, society gatherings, and a particularly interesting shot of the staff from 1935. On the back was written, "Hotel Evergreen Staff, June 1935. "Wait," Elijah said, examining the photo. "Dorothy, do you recognize anyone here?" She peered through her glasses. "Why, those are the Milburn twins, Esther and Edith. They're still alive, living over on Spruce Street. Must be in their 90s now." Twilight was settling as they knocked on the door of a well-maintained Victorian cottage. A tiny bird-like woman answered. "Miss Milburn?" Hannah ventured. "I'm Hannah Pearson from the Gazette, and this is Elijah Harmon. We're hoping to ask about your time working at the Evergreen Hotel." The woman's face lit up. "Oh, Esther, come see. Someone wants to hear our hotel stories." Soon they were seated in a parlor that seemed frozen in time, served tea by the identical sisters, whose only distinguishing feature was Esther's glasses. "We started as maids in 1934, just 16, Edith explained. "Worked there until it closed in 75. Beautiful place in its day," Esther added. "Chandeliers, velvet drapes, real silver service. What can you tell us about the lower level?" Elijah asked carefully. "Below the main floor." The sisters exchanged a quick glance. "Storage, mostly," Edith replied too quickly. "And the ballroom floor, was there anything unusual about it?" Hannah pressed. Another glance between them. Esther set down her teacup with a slight tremor. "We weren't supposed to talk about the downstairs guests," she whispered. "Esther," Edith hissed. "Oh, it's been 60 years, Edith. What does it matter now?" Elijah leaned forward. "Downstairs guests? Some guests didn't come through the front door," Esther explained. "Used a different entrance. Manager would ring a special bell, and we were to stay upstairs. Never saw their faces, Just heard them moving about at night. When did this happen? Hannah was scribbling rapidly. Certain nights only. When the stars aligned a particular way, the manager said. Esther's voice dropped further. Always smelled strange afterward. Like metal and smoke. As they left, Hannah was practically vibrating with excitement. Secret meetings beneath the hotel, running for decades. This is bigger than we thought. On the drive back, they passed Holcomb's black SUV parked outside the sheriff's office. Through the window, they glimpsed Victor in animated conversation with Sheriff Cooper. Our timeline just got shorter, Elijah said grimly. Returning to the hotel, they found an envelope pushed under the door. Inside was a bank check for $100,000 and a note in elegant handwriting, final offer. The ballroom floor lay exposed, a dozen floorboards carefully removed and stacked against the wall. Elijah knelt at the edge of the opening, flashlight beam illuminating the ornate inlaid patterns they had discovered. The compass keeps pointing to this central medallion, he said, tracing an elaborate design of interlocking circles and what appeared to be star charts. Hannah photographed from different angles. These symbols matched the pins from the golden circle photograph. Outside, snow was falling again, isolating the hotel in a white cocoon of silence. They had worked through the night, fueled by coffee and the thrill of discovery. Dawn was still hours away. I think it's a door, Elijah finally said, running his fingers along a nearly invisible seam in the wood. If it is, where's the handle? The mechanism? He pulled out the brass compass. This isn't just a measuring tool. Look at how perfectly it fits this circular depression. Indeed, the compass was exactly the same diameter as a recessed ring in the center of the medallion. Elijah placed it carefully into the depression, where it seated with a satisfying click. Nothing happened. Maybe it is to be turned, Hannah suggested. Elijah rotated the compass slowly clockwise. At the 3/4 mark, resistance stopped him. He tried counterclockwise instead and felt a distinct mechanical click at each cardinal point. On the 4th click, the medallion shifted slightly. It's some kind of combination lock, he breathed. The symbols, Hannah said suddenly. On the compass, they must indicate the correct sequence. It took nearly an hour of trial and error, aligning different symbols to different points on the medallion. Finally, a particular arrangement, matching a constellation pattern they'd seen in Blackwood's photograph, yielded results. A soft mechanical whir emanated from beneath them, and the entire center section of floor, nearly 6 feet in diameter, recessed downward by several inches. Stand back, Elijah warned. He applied gentle pressure to one edge of the lowered section, and the perfectly balanced trapdoor swung silently downward on hidden hinges, revealing a darkness below. The flashlight beam caught particles of dust, dancing in the still air of a chamber that hadn't been opened in decades, perhaps longer. A narrow wooden ladder descended about 10 feet to a stone floor. The air that rose from the opening was surprisingly fresh, not the stale breath they had expected from a sealed room. I'll go first, Elijah said, securing the flashlight to his belt. The ladder creaked, but held his weight. Hannah followed cautiously, her camera banging against her chest. The chamber below was smaller than the ballroom, but still substantial, perhaps 30 feet across, its walls of fitted stone blocks unlike anything in the hotel above. Most striking was the craftsmanship. The ceiling was coffered with intricate woodwork, the floor a mosaic of polished stone. Gas lamps with tarnished brass fixtures lined the walls. This isn't storage, Hannah whispered. It's a meeting room. A circular table dominated the center, surrounded by 13 chairs, each carved with different symbols matching those on the medallion above. Dust-covered ledgers sat on a side table, alongside crystal decanters and glasses. Look at this, Elijah called, examining one wall. It was covered with maps, geological surveys of the surrounding mountains, property deeds, mining claims. Colored pins and thread connected various locations. Many were marked with small golden circles. They were tracking something, Hannah said. Gold deposits maybe, or ownership. Elijah pointed to names scrawled on certain properties. These were all miners who supposedly struck it rich, then mysteriously sold their claims to members of the circle. Hannah opened one of the ledgers, its pages filled with neat columns of figures and names. These are payoff. Blackwood and his group were systematically acquiring every productive claim in the area, one way or another. In the far corner, Elijah discovered another door, heavy oak banded with iron, but it was locked with no obvious keyhole or mechanism. Nearby stood a small wooden chest. Inside lay what appeared to be ceremonial items, white gloves, small golden pins, like those in the photograph, and a leather-bound book whose pages were covered in elaborate code. "Hannah, this is bigger than a real estate conspiracy," he said. This was a full-blown secret society. As they continued exploring, Elijah noticed a peculiar cold spot near the locked door, air significantly chillier than the rest of the room, yet with no visible source or draft. When he extended his hand toward it, the cold intensified until his fingers ached. Simultaneously, the trapdoor above them slammed shut with a thunderous boom. Hannah gasped, dropping her notebook. What was that? Elijah raced to the ladder, but when he pushed against the trapdoor, it wouldn't budge. "Something's blocking it," he grunted, shoving harder. "Or someone," Hannah whispered. In the sudden quiet, they both heard it, the faint but distinct sound of footsteps moving across the ballroom floor above them. Morning light filtered through the grimy ballroom windows, illuminating Elijah's exhausted face as he sipped coffee from a chipped mug. Beside him, Hannah scrolled through photographs on her camera, dark circles under her eyes matching his own. 4 hours, she said. 4 hours trapped down there. After the trapdoor had slammed shut, they had called out, banged on the ceiling, even tried to pry between the seams with Elijah's pocket knife, all without success. Then, just as suddenly as it had closed, the door had reopened around dawn. They'd emerged to find the ballroom empty, snow outside undisturbed by footprints. Could have been the mechanism, Elijah suggested without conviction. Some kind of timer or counterweight. "You don't believe that?" He didn't respond, instead retrieving a notebook containing sketches he'd made of the chamber below, the table, chairs, maps, and most importantly, the locked door in the corner with its inexplicable cold spot. "Whatever's behind that door," he began. The sound of a truck pulling up interrupted him. Through the window they watched Frank Miller from the diner climb out, glancing nervously over his shoulder before approaching the hotel. "Elijah? You in there, boy?" he called, knocking tentative. They found him on the porch, shifting from foot to foot. "Just wanted to check if you're all right." "Folks are talking about..." Frank looked uncomfortable. "Lights in the hotel last night. Moving around like someone with a flashlight, but different kind of glowing light. Sheriff was asking questions at the diner this morning." Elijah and Hannah exchanged glances. They had been underground during the hours Frank described. "We're fine, Frank. Just restoration work." The older man nodded, unconvinced. "Listen, son, there's them in town saying you should leave well enough alone, but there's others." He lowered his voice. "Others who think it's time things came to light." "What things exactly?" Hannah pressed. Frank shook his head. "Ask Margaret. She knows more than she lets on." After he left, they decided to separate. Hannah to file preliminary notes at the Gazette. Elijah to continue work at the hotel. As Hannah's car disappeared down the mountain road, Elijah felt a strange sense of being watched. He scanned the tree line but saw nothing. In town, Hannah found the newspaper office buzzing with unusual energy. Her editor, Glenn Peterson, waved her into his office immediately. "Where've you been?" "Got calls from 3 council members asking about your unauthorized investigation into the Evergreen." Hannah bristled. "Since when does local government approve our stories?" "Since Raymond Holcomb started calling in his loans," Glenn replied grimly. "Half the businesses in town owe him money, including this paper." "You can't kill this story, Glenn. It is bigger than we thought. Secret chambers, hidden meetings spanning decades, possible connections to missing gold." "Slow down. You actually found something under that old hotel?" Hannah described their discoveries, showing select photographs. Glenn's skepticism gradually shifted to cautious interest. "This could be the biggest story we've run in years," he admitted. "But tread carefully. Holcomb isn't just wealthy, he's connected, and Sheriff Cooper follows his lead." Meanwhile, Elijah had made an unsettling discovery. Returning to his truck for tools, he found a note under the windshield wiper. Not Holcomb's elegant handwriting, but block letters cut from newspaper headlines, reading simply, "Leave it buried." That afternoon, at Margaret's cottage, the old woman pored over Hannah's photographs with trembling hands. "I knew it existed," she whispered. "My grandfather spoke of the chamber beneath before he disappeared." "Disappeared?" Elijah repeated. Margaret nodded slowly. 18 him and 4 other miners. All vanished. Same night. Official story was they left town after selling their claims. Her eyes hardened. But their belongings stayed. Their families stayed, waiting for men who never returned. "You think they found something in the mines," Hannah said. "Something they weren't supposed to find. Or they knew something." Margaret extracted a yellowed newspaper from a drawer. The headline read, "Miners depart after windfall sales." "Look at the names," she instructed. Elijah read aloud. "William Sullivan, Thomas Grant, Edwin Pierce, Frederick Johnson, Henry Cooper." "Sullivan," Hannah noted. "Your grandfather." "And Cooper, like the sheriff," Elijah added. Margaret nodded grimly. Most of those miners had families with names you'd recognize around town today. Some prospered afterward, despite losing their menfolk. Others, she glanced meaningfully at Hannah, others struggled, generation after generation. As dusk approached, Elijah drove Hannah back to the hotel, both lost in thought. "The town's dividing," Hannah observed. "Some people want us to stop, others seem to want the truth out. Question is, which side is actively working against us?" Elijah gestured toward his truck. That note wasn't a friendly warning. The hotel loomed before them, windows catching the last copper rays of sunset. As they approached the porch, Hannah suddenly grabbed Elijah's arm. "Someone's been here." The front door stood slightly ajar. Inside, their materials had been searched, papers disturbed. But most disturbing was the ballroom. The trapdoor they had so carefully concealed was fully exposed, the floorboards they'd removed to access it now arranged in a perfect circle around the opening. A message had been scratched into the wood. "Time is running out." Rain lashed against Margaret Sullivan's cottage windows, turning the afternoon gloomy and intimate. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the 3 figures huddled around a small table. "I've never shown this to anyone," Margaret said, her gnarled fingers caressing a leather-bound journal. "Not even my late husband." The cover was worn smooth by decades of handling. No title adorned it, just a small stamped symbol that matched the golden circle emblem they'd seen before. "My grandfather's," she explained. "William Sullivan kept it hidden in the walls of our family home. My grandmother found it after he vanished, but feared to show anyone. It passed to my mother, then to me." "Why show us now?" Hannah asked gently. Margaret's eyes, clouded with cataracts, but sharp with purpose, fixed on Elijah. "Because that hotel has waited long enough for someone who can hear it speak." She opened the journal carefully, revealing pages filled with a neat, masculine hand. William was educated, unlike most miners. He recorded everything, not just his work, but the strange happenings in Pinecrest. Elijah leaned forward as she turned to a specific entry, dated September 17, 1887. "Tonight marks the 3rd disappearance this year. Young Jenkins from the assay office vanished between the saloon and his boarding house. A distance of only 200 yards. Sheriff claims the boy likely left town, but his belongings remain untouched. Like the others, he had recently spoken of unusual findings in certain ore samples." "What findings?" Hannah asked. Margaret continued turning pages. "My grandfather and 4 others discovered something in a new seam, something that excited and frightened them. He doesn't describe it directly, just calls it the anomaly." She pointed to another entry from January 1888. Blackwood summoned me to the hotel today. His circle was there, all watching as he made his offer for my claim. The price was generous, but when I hesitated, the atmosphere changed. I saw then what lurks behind their genteel facades. Consider your family, Judge Pierce suggested. They know about our discovery. I fear our time grows short. He knew they were dangerous, Elijah observed. Yes, but not how dangerous. Margaret's voice quavered. 3 months later, he and the others met secretly to discuss going to the federal authorities. That night, they all vanished. She turned to the last entry, the handwriting noticeably hurried. What we found isn't just gold. The deeper chamber contains something older, something that doesn't belong. B and his circle aren't just mining it, they're using it somehow. The vault beneath the hotel, God help us if we're right. Silence filled the room, broken only by rain against glass and wood, settling in the fire. You believe your grandfather found something beyond gold in the mountains? Hannah said finally, something Blackwood and his circle wanted kept secret. I believe they killed those men to keep that secret, Margaret replied sharply. And I believe they didn't stop with them. She extracted a folded newspaper clipping from the journal. The headline read, Hotel Incident Claims 3 Lives. March 1889. A tragic accident. During a private event at the Evergreen, 3 maintenance workers killed when equipment malfunctioned. Their bodies were never returned to their families, and Blackwood disappeared right after, Elijah recalled. Some say he fled. Others say the circle eliminated him too, once he'd served his purpose. Margaret closed the journal and picked up a small wooden box from beside her chair. From it she removed an object wrapped in faded velvet, a journal identical to the first, but with a different symbol embossed on its cover. This I found hidden beneath the floorboards of my mother's bedroom, after she died. It's not my grandfather. She opened it to reveal flowing feminine handwriting. It belonged to Sophia Blackwood, Augustus's wife. Hannah gasped. I didn't know he was married. Few remember. She was beautiful, educated, and according to town gossip, increasingly disturbed in the months before she died in. Margaret indicated a passage. Returns from their gatherings changed, feverish with excitement, yet somehow colder toward me. Last night I followed him to the hotel and witnessed their ritual through the window. What I saw cannot be explained by reason or They stand in a circle around something that glows like molten gold, but moves like a living thing. Elijah shivered, despite the fire's warmth. She was murdered, wasn't she? Nervous fever was the official cause, Margaret replied dryly. A month after my grandfather vanished. Hannah carefully photographed key pages as Margaret permitted. These journals connect the disappearances to whatever's hidden beneath the hotel. But what exactly did they find? That I don't know. Margaret reclaimed the journals, returning them to their box. But the circle still exists, watching, waiting. Raymond Holcomb is just its current face. As Margaret walked them to the door, she gripped Elijah's arm. There's one more thing. The combination to the second door beneath Sophia wrote that it requires a specific sequence from the Book of Stars they used in ceremonies. I believe that book is still in the chamber you found. From her window, Margaret watched them drive away in the rain. Across the street, a black SUV sat idling, Victor's unmistakable silhouette behind the wheel. She returned to her chair, removed a loose floorboard, and hid the journals in a space that had protected family secrets for generations. They're coming for us all now, William, she whispered to her long-dead grandfather. But maybe this time, the truth will finally win. The night was moonless as Elijah and Hannah slipped back into the Evergreen Hotel, using only red-filtered flashlights to avoid detection from the road. Snow had begun falling again, concealing their footprints almost as quickly as they made them. "You sure about this?" Hannah whispered, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Elijah nodded, his expression resolute. "After what Margaret showed us, we can't wait. If Holcomb realizes she's helping us." They moved efficiently through the dark lobby, navigating by memory to the ballroom. The trapdoor remained uncovered since their last visit, a black square against the dusty floor. Elijah knelt beside it, listening intently before attempting to open it. No sounds below, he confirmed. Using the brass compass once again, they activated the mechanism. The trapdoor descended silently on well-balanced hinges. Stale air rose from the opening, but with a peculiar freshness beneath, not the musty entrapment from days before. "Someone's been down here since us," Hannah observed. They descended cautiously, sweeping their lights across the underground chamber. Everything appeared untouched. The circular table with 13 chairs, the maps on the wall, the ledgers, yet something felt different. The cold spot. Elijah realized. It's stronger now. Near the locked oak door, the temperature dropped dramatically, their breath now forming thick clouds that lingered unnaturally. Hannah's camera lens fogged instantly. "Let's find that book Margaret mentioned," she suggested, moving toward the wooden chest they'd examined before. The ceremonial items remained white gloves, golden pins, but now Elijah noticed a false bottom in the chest, revealed by a slight misalignment. Carefully prying it open, he discovered a slim volume bound in what appeared to be snakeskin, its cover adorned with astronomical symbols, inlaid in gold. "The Book of Stars," he breathed. The pages contained intricate star charts, symbols matching those on the compass, and text in a code similar to that in the ledgers. Intermingled were disturbing illustrations, human figures arranged in circular formations, strange geometrical patterns, and what appeared to be a substance flowing from the earth into ceremonial vessels. "I think this is a ritual guide," Hannah said, photographing each page. "Look at these diagrams. They show the chamber we're in, but also something beyond that door." A particular illustration caught Elijah's attention. 13 figures positioned around a central point, with lines connecting to symbols that matched those on the locked door. "This could be the combination sequence," he suggested. "If we can decode which symbol corresponds to which position." The task proved challenging but not impossible. Using the compass as a decoder and matching symbols from both Margaret's grandfather's descriptions and the ritual illustrations, they gradually identified a potential sequence. "It's based on stars visible during specific lunar phases." Hannah realized they could only open this door on certain nights, or they wanted us to think that, Elijah countered. "Blackwood was an engineer before coming here. This could be misdirection, a false security measure." Working methodically, they identified 13 symbols and their corresponding positions. Around the edge of the door were 13 small depressions, each carved with one of the symbols. "We need to press them in the correct sequence," Elijah concluded. The first attempt yielded nothing. On the second, incorporating the lunar cycle mentioned in the margin notes, they heard a faint click from within the door mechanism. "One more sequence," Hannah whispered. The third attempt, reversing the order based on a notation in the book, produced results. A series of mechanical sounds emanated from within the door like ancient gears turning. Then, with the grinding of metal that hadn't moved in decades, the door swung inward. Beyond lay darkness deeper than their flashlight beams could penetrate. A cold breeze flowed from the opening, carrying an unfamiliar metallic scent. More concerning was the sound, a distant rhythmic rushing, like water flowing through underground channels. "We need to see what's down there," Elijah said, removing climbing rope from his back. "You were planning this all along," Hannah observed. He secured the rope to one of the heavy chairs. "After what Margaret told us, I knew we'd need to go deeper." The passage beyond the door revealed rough-hewn steps descending at a steep angle. Unlike the carefully crafted chamber they stood in, this tunnel had been carved directly into the mountain bedrock, its walls glistening with mineral deposits that caught and reflected their flashlight beams with unusual intensity. Descending cautiously, they followed the passage as it twisted deeper into the mountain. The sound of flowing water grew louder, and the air became noticeably damp. After perhaps 200 feet, the tunnel widened into another chamber, this one natural rather than constructed. A cave whose walls were lined with a mineral Elijah didn't recognize. It glinted gold in their flashlight beams, but seemed to pulse with its own inner light. "What is this?" Hannah whispered, reaching toward the strange mineral. "Don't touch it," Elijah warned. In the center of the cave floor was a channel where water flowed rapidly, emerging from one rock wall and disappearing into another. The water itself seemed oddly luminescent, carrying specks of the same golden mineral. A sudden noise from behind made them freeze, footsteps from the direction they had come. "Someone followed us," Hannah hissed. Elijah quickly extinguished his light and pulled Hannah behind a rock formation. As they crouched in darkness, their eyes adjusted enough to realize that the cave walls provided enough dim illumination to see by the strange mineral, emitting a faint but steady glow. On a ledge near the water channel, partially hidden by rocks, Elijah spotted a metallic object. Reaching carefully, he retrieved what appeared to be an old miner's lamp, unusually ornate, plated with gold, and decorated with symbols matching those in the Book of Stars. More surprising, when he turned its small valve, the lamp lit with a steady flame, as if it had been recently filled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hotel's weathered porch, as Elijah and Hannah huddled over their coffee, exhaustion etched in the dark circles beneath their eyes. They had barely escaped the underground cavern, retreating at the sound of approaching footsteps and sealing the mechanisms behind them. "We need to tell someone," Hannah said, her voice hoarse from the damp air they'd breathed all night. "Whatever's down there, it's not natural." Elijah nodded, his thoughts on the glowing mineral and the strange flowing water they'd discovered. "But who?" "The sheriff works for Holcomb. The town council's in his pocket." "My editor might," Hannah began, but the crunch of tires on gravel interrupted her. Raymond Holcomb's black SUV pulled up beside Elijah's truck. This time, he wasn't alone. Victor emerged from the driver's side, while Holcomb exited the passenger door with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to being chauffeured. A third man, younger, with the look of a corporate lawyer, followed with a briefcase. "Mr. Harmon," Holcomb called, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Beautiful morning for a business discussion." Elijah stood, positioning himself subtly between Hannah and the visitors. "My answer hasn't changed, Mr. Holcomb. Actually, I'm here with a different proposition." He gestured toward the hotel. "May we step inside? Some matters are best discussed privately." The tension in Victor's stance made refusal seem unwise. Elijah led them into the lobby, where chairs had been arranged around a makeshift table, an old door balanced on sawhorses. "You've been busy," Holcomb observed, glancing toward the ballroom where the exposed trapdoor was now concealed beneath a canvas tarp. "Made some interesting discoveries, I imagine." "Just structural assessments," Elijah replied evenly. Holcomb's smile tightened. "Mr. Harmon, let's not waste time. You found the chamber beneath the ballroom, and likely the passage beyond." He turned to, "And you, Miss Pearson, have been documenting everything for a rather explosive expose, I'd imagine." Hannah's grip tightened on her camera. "Freedom of the press, Mr. Holcomb." "Indeed. A noble institution." He nodded to the lawyer, who opened his briefcase and extracted a document. "Which is why I've reconsidered my approach. Instead of purchasing your property, Mr. Harmon, I'd like to propose a partnership." Elijah's eyes narrowed. "Partnership? You keep the hotel, continue your restoration, with my financial backing. I provide capital, historical expertise about the building, and protection from certain regulatory complications that might arise. And in return," Hannah asked sharply, "joint ownership of anything discovered beneath the hotel." Holcomb's eyes gleamed. "I know what you found, Mr. Harmon. I know about the mineral deposits, the water source, the unusual properties. My family has known for generations." The silence stretched taut between them. "Why not just take it?" Elijah finally asked. "You have the influence. Because some things require certain lineages to access fully." Holcomb's gaze intensified. "Your name, Harmon. It appears in the early town records, though your family never joined the circle. They were selected, but declined the invitation." Victor shifted impatiently. "Enough history. Sign the papers, or we do this differently." The subtle threat hung in the air until the front door banged open. Sheriff Cooper strode in, hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "Everything all right here?" he asked, eyes scanning the tense tableau. "Sheriff," Holcomb nodded. Perfect timing. We were just discussing a business arrangement. Cooper's gaze lingered on Elijah. Seems more like a disagreement. Any problems I should know about? Something in his tone made Elijah pause. Despite their earlier suspicions, Cooper's question seemed genuinely directed at him. Not Holcomb. Just discussing the hotel's future, Elijah replied carefully. Cooper nodded slowly. Well, speaking of futures, Raymond, the council's asking about that donation you promised for the new fire truck. Meetings in 20 minutes. A flash of irritation crossed Holcomb's face before his smooth mask returned. Of course, we'll continue this later. To Elijah, he added, review the proposal. Victor will return this evening for your answer. After they departed, Cooper remained behind. Watch yourself, Harmon. Holcomb doesn't make offers twice. You're not with him? Hannah asked bluntly. Cooper's weathered face betrayed nothing. Been sheriff here 30 years. Seen things come and go. He turned to leave, then paused. My great-grandfather was Henry Cooper, one of the miners who disappeared in a... The revelation hung in the air as the door closed behind him. Later that afternoon, Hannah stormed into the hotel, face flushed with anger. They killed my story. Editorial board emergency meeting unanimously voted that unsubstantiated historical allegations could damage community relations. She threw a folder onto their makeshift table. Inside was a newspaper clipping from the previous week, a small announcement that Holcomb Bank had approved refinancing for the Gazette's printing press upgrade. He owns everyone, she fumed. Not everyone, Elijah said, showing her a text from Margaret. My home was searched today. Be careful. As evening approached, they saw Victor's SUV parked at the end of the drive, waiting. Hannah's phone buzzed with an email. It's from a historical archive in Denver, she said, scanning quickly. I contacted them about Augustus Blackwood. They found something, an old newspaper from 18... The attached image showed a headline, Tragedy at Mountain Hotel. 3 dead in mysterious accident. The photograph accompanying the article showed workers removing sheet-covered bodies, with a caption reading, Maintenance workers perish during private gathering of the town's elite. Prominent businessman Augustus Blackwood, unavailable for comment. In the background of the image, partially visible behind a group of onlookers, was a face they recognized immediately. Raymond Holcomb's great-grandfather, looking not grief-stricken, but watchful, his hand clutching what appeared to be the same ornate compass now in Elijah's possession. Darkness had fully descended by the time Victor's SUV finally departed from the hotel drive. Whether he'd grown tired of waiting or been called away, Elijah couldn't tell, but the reprieve was welcome. We need to go back down, he said, checking the locks on the doors once more. Tonight, while they're expecting us to be considering Holcomb's offer, Hannah nodded, her earlier exhaustion replaced by determination. If we wait, they might take more direct action. This time, they moved with practiced efficiency, opening the trapdoor, descending to the first chamber, and unlocking the secondary door using the sequence they'd discovered. The golden miner's lamp Elijah had found lit their way, its flames steadier and brighter than any normal oil lamp should produce. The passageway beyond felt different than before. The air warmer, the sounds of flowing water more pronounced. When they reached the cavern with the strange glowing mineral, they noticed something they'd missed in their hasty retreat earlier. A narrow ledge running alongside the underground stream, leading deeper into the mountain. It's a path, Elijah realized, deliberately carved. The ledge was wide enough for single-file travel. Hannah went first, photographing as they progressed. The stream beside them flowed faster here, carrying more of the glinting particle. After perhaps 100 yards, the passage widened dramatically into a vast chamber that drew gasps from them both. Unlike the natural cavern before, this space had been purposefully excavated and finished. Its walls smoothed, floor leveled, and ceiling reinforced with timber supports that had somehow resisted rot for over a century. Most striking was its design. A perfect circle, with 13 stone chairs arranged around a central dais. Each chair was carved with different symbols matching those from the Book of Stars and the compass. The dais itself contained a circular depression that appeared designed to hold something. "It's a ritual chamber," Hannah whispered, her voice echoing slightly despite her hushed tone. "The golden circle's inner sanctum." Elijah raised the lamp higher. Along the walls between each chair stood alcoves containing various artifacts. Ceremonial robes, strange instruments of brass and glass, leather-bound volumes. Many bore the now familiar circle and compass emblem. They weren't just businessmen or thieves, he said. This was something more organized, religious, almost. In one alcove he discovered a wooden box containing 13 medallions, each exquisitely crafted from gold with the circle emblem prominently displayed. He recognized them immediately from the photograph of Blackwood and his associate. "One for each member," Hannah observed, carefully photographing without touching. The air in the chamber felt charged, as if the stone itself retained memories of what had transpired here. The gold-flecked stream flowed through a channel that encircled the dais, disappearing beneath the far wall. As Hannah explored the chairs, Elijah examined the central platform more closely. Its surface was inscribed with astronomical charts, similar to those in the Book of Stars, but with additional notations he couldn't decipher. At the center of the depression, a small cylindrical hole penetrated deep into the stone. "I think something was mounted here," he called to Hannah. "Something they gathered around." Like this, she had opened another compartment built into one chair, more ornate than the others, and clearly the leader's position. Inside was a golden rod, topped with an intricate mechanical device resembling an astrolabe. Before they could examine it further, a distant sound echoed down the passage behind them. Voices, and the shuffle of approaching footsteps. "Hide," Elijah hissed, quickly extinguishing the lamp. They retreated behind the largest chairs as the voices grew close. Flashlight beams danced at the chamber entrance. "Told you they'd found it," came a voice they recognized as Victor's. "Holcomb wants everything secured before the next phase." "And if they've already taken something?" asked another voice. "Then we find them and take it back. The sequence doesn't work without all 13 pieces." The beams swept across the chamber, revealing 3 figures, Victor and 2 men they didn't recognize, all carrying modern equipment, including what appeared to be metal detectors and sensing devices. "The water levels rising faster than expected," one man reported, checking instruments at the stream's edge. "We've got maybe 48 hours before the lower chambers flood completely." "Plenty of time," Victor replied. "Start cataloging everything. Holcomb wants the medallions and the rod particularly, and check if the vault mechanism has been disturbed." As the men began systematically searching the alcoves, Elijah spotted a narrow crevice behind the chairs, possibly another passage. He caught Hannah's eye and pointed. She nodded, and they began inching backward, staying in the shadows. Their retreat was almost successful until Hannah's camera bumped against stone with a soft but distinct tap. Victor's head snapped up. "Someone's here," he growled, drawing a pistol from beneath his jacket. "Find them." In the chaos that followed, flashlights sweeping wildly, men shouting, Elijah and Hannah slipped into the narrow crevice, finding themselves in a maintenance tunnel, clearly designed for servicing the chamber. As Victor's angry voice faded behind them, they emerged into yet another passage, this one sloping upward. "I think this leads back to the hotel," Elijah whispered. "A different way out." In his pocket, he carried one of the golden medallions, identical to those worn by Blackwood and his circle in the old photograph, now their evidence of what lay beneath the mountain. Rain hammered against the hotel windows with increasing fury, driven by winds that moaned through the eaves like distant voices. The storm had descended upon Pinecrest with unusual ferocity, catching even long-time mountain residents by surprise. 3 inches in the last 4 hours, Sheriff Cooper announced, stomping snow and mud from his boots as he entered the hotel lobby. Rivers rising fast. Road might wash out by morning. Elijah looked up from the maps spread across his makeshift table. After their narrow escape from Victor and his men, the previous night, he and Hannah had emerged from a hidden door in the hotel's wine cellar, a room he hadn't even known existed. Until then, how bad? He asked. Counties issued flash flood warnings. Most concerning is the old mining territory upstream. Cooper's weathered face was grim. Those tunnels act like channels when they flood. Water goes places it hasn't been in decades. Hannah exchanged a knowing glance with Elijah. Places like beneath this hotel. Cooper studied her carefully. You've been down there, haven't you? Both of you. The moment of truth had arrived. Either Cooper was an ally, or he wasn't. Elijah decided to gamble. Yes, we found chambers, tunnels, evidence of what the Golden Circle was really doing. He produced the medallion from his pocket, and we know your great-grandfather was one of the miners who disappeared after discovering something they wanted kept secret. Cooper took the medallion, turning it over in his calloused hands. Henry Cooper never even got to see my grandfather born. He returned the gold piece. What else did you find? Hannah described the ceremonial chamber, the strange glowing mineral, and the underground stream now threatening to flood the entire system. Victor mentioned the vault. Does that mean anything to you? The sheriff's expression darkened. Family stories. Supposedly Blackwood built a vault beneath the hotel to store something valuable. Not gold. Something else they found in the mountain. He glanced toward the rain-lashed windows. If those lower chambers flood completely, we lose whatever evidence might still be down there, Elijah finished. And maybe the structural integrity of the entire hotel. A crash of thunder punctuated his words, followed by an ominous creaking from below, like metal under pressure. That's not the storm, Elijah said, already moving toward the ballroom. The trapdoor was vibrating slightly, water seeping around its edges. When they opened it, the ladder below was already submerged in 6 inches of rising water. It's backing up from somewhere, Cooper observed, shining his flashlight down. Natural drainage must be overwhelmed. Elijah grabbed his tools. We need to go down. There might be a way to divert it. You're going down there with a flood coming? Cooper asked incredulously. If water reaches the ceremonial chamber, everything we've discovered will be destroyed, Hannah explained. And if Victor was right about some sequence involving those medallions, Cooper hesitated, then nodded. I'll come with you. 2 conditions: we bring proper equipment, and we tell Margaret Sullivan where we're going. If something happens, someone needs to know the truth. 20 minutes later, equipped with waterproof flashlights, rope and Cooper's police radio, they descended into water that now reached their knees. The first chamber remained relatively intact, though water pooled across its floor. This way, Elijah directed, leading them through the oak door toward the natural cavern. The narrow passage beyond had become treacherous, water rushing ankle-deep along the carved steps. The sound of the underground stream had transformed from a gentle flow to a roaring torrent. It's coming from further in the mountain, Cooper shouted over the noise. Mining tunnels must have breached a water table or underground river. The natural cavern with its glowing mineral was now partially flooded, the stream having overflowed its banks. Water cascaded from fissures in the walls, carrying more of the strange golden particles into the growing pool. The ceremonial chamber will be flooding too, Hannah realized. Fighting the current, they made their way along the ledge path. Cooper stopped suddenly, pointing his light at an alcove they had missed before. Look there! Set into the rock wall was an elaborate mechanical control panel, brass levers, valves and gauges green with verdigris, but remarkably intact. Symbols matching those from the Book of Stars marked different controls. It's a water management system, Elijah realized, examining the ancient machinery. They engineered this place to control the flow. Cooper ran his fingers over inscriptions beside the controls. My great-grandfather was a mining engineer before coming to Pinecrest. This could have been his work. With the sheriff's help, Elijah began carefully testing the mechanism. Most valves were frozen with age, but several levers still moved. After several attempts, they managed to engage a rusted gear system. Deep within the mountain, they heard a massive metallic groan, followed by the sound of rushing water changing direction. Look, Hannah pointed to the stream, where the water level had begun noticeably receding. It's working. Elijah manipulated the controls further, following diagrams etched into the panel. They built this to protect the lower chambers. There must be drainage tunnels diverting water away from the ceremonial areas. As the immediate flooding threat subsided, Cooper's flashlight caught something floating in the receding water, a waterlogged journal. Hannah carefully retrieved it, opening its sodden pages to find diagrams of the vault mentioned in Margaret's grandfather's note. It says the vault is accessible from the ceremonial chamber, she read, squinting at the faded ink. Behind the leader's chair, a hidden door activated by something called the Key of Stars. The golden rod we saw, Elijah suggested. A particularly ominous rumble shook the cavern, dislodging small stones from the ceiling. We need to move, Cooper urged. This system is old, no telling how long the diversion will hold. As they made their way back toward the ceremonial chamber, Hannah stopped suddenly. Listen. From the direction of the chamber came voices, angry, urgent voices. Victor, Elijah whispered. They must have come back when the flooding started. Cooper drew his service weapon. Stay behind me. Through a narrow observation crack, they could see Victor and 4 men frantically removing items from the chamber. The water had been largely diverted, but still pooled ankle-deep across the floor. Get everything to the truck, Victor ordered. Holcomb wants the medallions and the rod tonight. The rest can wait until the storm passes. What about the vault? One man asked. Victor shook his head. Needs the full sequence. We're missing pieces. Let's move. This place could still come down around us. Morning brought watery sunlight and the aftermath of destruction. Roads had washed out in 3 places. Trees lay toppled across power lines, and the river had carved new channels through parts of Pinecrest. The hotel, standing on higher ground, had weathered the storm relatively well, though water damage in the basement hinted at how close it had come to catastrophe. Elijah stood on the porch, surveying the town below. Beside him, Sheriff Cooper spoke into his radio, coordinating emergency response teams. Counties sending help, he reported, signing off. But we're on our own for at least 24 hours. Hannah emerged from inside, her laptop open. I've bypassed the Gazette, posted everything directly to my blog. The photographs, our findings, Margaret's grandfather's journal excerpts. It's all public now. How long before Holcomb notices? Elijah asked. He already has. She turned the screen to show a cease and desist email from Holcomb's lawyers, threatening legal action for defamation and publication of proprietary historical materials. Cooper snorted. Let him try. Can't put this genie back in the bottle. By noon, Hannah's blog had spread through the town like wildfire. People gathered in small clusters, despite the mud and debris, some reading on phones, others in heated discussion. When Elijah drove into town for supplies, he felt the stares, some hostile, others curious, or even supportive. At the diner, now running on generator power, the divisions were even more apparent. One table of older men fell silent as he entered, their expressions dark. But Frank Miller approached openly, extending his hand. About time someone shed light on all this, he said. My family lost mining rights to Blackwood's bunch back in the day. Always knew something wasn't right about it. Others nodded in agreement, but Bernie behind the counter looked anxious. Holcomb Bank holds my mortgage, Elijah. Half the businesses in town owe them. This could get ugly. Truth usually does, came a familiar voice. Margaret Sullivan stood in the doorway, her silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. She looked smaller somehow, more fragile, but her eyes burned with vindication. Miss Sullivan, Cooper acknowledged respectfully. Shouldn't you be home resting after last night's excitement? When the creek behind my house turned that strange golden color, I knew the mountain was finally giving up its secrets. She settled at Elijah's table with surprising grace. I brought something you should see. From her purse, she extracted a yellowed document, official minutes from a town council meeting dated November 1889, 3 months after the incident at the hotel. The paper recorded a vote on a motion described only as regarding the Evergreen Hotel matter. The vote had been 7-2 in favor, with a cryptic note. Council agrees to seal and forget. Future generations must be protected from knowledge of same. Where did you find this? Hannah asked, photographing the document. My late husband was town clerk for 40 years. He kept copies of everything. Margaret's thin fingers traced the names of those who had voted. Notice the two dissenters, Matthew Cooper and James Sullivan. Your ancestors, she added, looking between the sheriff and herself. They wanted the truth known. A commotion outside drew their attention. Through the window, they could see Raymond Holcomb's SUV parked in front of the town hall. A crowd had gathered as he addressed them, his expression grave but determined. He's doing damage control, Cooper observed. They stepped outside in time to hear Holcomb's smooth voice carrying across the crowd. Irresponsible journalism and treasure hunting that endangers our historic structures and our town's reputation. The Evergreen has stood for generations. If it collapses due to unauthorized excavations, who bears responsibility? Maybe you should worry about what's under that hotel instead of the building itself, someone called out. Holcomb's smile tightened. Old mining towns are full of legends and tall tales. What matters now is safety and preservation. He spotted Elijah and his companions at the edge of the crowd, his eyes narrowing slightly. Mr. Harmon, perhaps you'd like to explain to your neighbors why you've rejected legitimate offers to professionally restore the Evergreen in favor of amateur tunneling that threatens its structural integrity. Before Elijah could respond, Margaret stepped forward, her voice stronger than her frame suggested. I'd like to know why your men were removing artifacts from beneath the hotel last night, Raymond. Items that rightfully belong to this town's historical record. A murmur ran through the crowd. Holcomb's composure slipped momentarily before he recovered. Miss Sullivan, your family has been spreading the same unfounded stories for generations. Perhaps at your age. Don't patronize me, she snapped. I saw your father doing the same thing during the flood of '62. The Holcombs have been looting that hotel's secrets for a century. The crowd's mood was shifting, dividing visibly between those nodding in agreement and others looking uncertain or hostile. Sheriff Cooper stepped forward, deliberately placing himself beside Elijah and Margaret. As a matter of public safety, I'm ordering a temporary halt to all activities at the Evergreen Hotel pending a proper structural assessment. He looked directly at Holcomb. That includes any removal of historical artifacts from the property by anyone. You're exceeding your authority, Sheriff. Holcomb replied coldly, maybe so, but until the county engineer gets here, my word is law in Pinecrest. Cooper turned to address the crowd. Folks, we've got storm damage to deal with. Let's focus on getting our town back in working order. The hotel has stood for 140 years. It'll keep a few more days. As the crowd dispersed, Hannah's phone chimed with an email notification. It's from my editor, she said, scanning the message. He's been fired. The board's bringing in someone from Holcomb's Denver office to restore the paper's credibility. Elijah looked back toward the hotel on the hill, its weathered silhouette stark against the clearing sky. The battle lines are drawn, he said quietly, and we're running out of time. Night had fallen over Pinecrest, the town's usual darkness deepened by power outages still affecting half the buildings. In Margaret Sullivan's cottage, illuminated by oil lamps that cast flickering shadows across aged furniture, 4 figures bent over maps and documents spread across her dining table. Holcomb's filed an emergency injunction, Cooper said, setting aside his radio. County judge will hear it tomorrow morning. Claims the hotel is unstable and requires immediate professional intervention. That gives us tonight, Elijah replied. The waters receded from the lower chambers, but who knows for how long. Margaret's thin fingers traced the diagrams from the recovered journal. The vault is mentioned in my grandfather's writings too. He called it the repository of truth, where Blackwood kept evidence of what they'd really found. Hannah studied the ceremonial chamber photos on her laptop. Behind the leader's chair there should be a hidden door, but Victor said they needed the full sequence to open it. The medallions, Elijah surmised. 13 members, 13 medallions. They must create some kind of combination. Cooper nodded grimly. And Victor's men took most of them last night. Margaret rose shakily, disappearing into her bedroom. She returned with a small wooden box. Not all of them. Inside lay a single golden medallion, identical to the one Elijah had taken. My grandmother found this among William's things after he vanished. 2 medallions, Hannah said. That still leaves 11 we don't have. Margaret smiled enigmatically. Perhaps not. The journal mentions a master key that Blackwood created in case members were unavailable. She tapped a passage in the water-damaged pages. It speaks of celestial alignments, the positions marked on what they called the star compass. Elijah extracted the brass compass from his pocket. This? But how would it replace the medallions? The Book of Stars, Hannah realized. It showed the positioning of each member during ceremonies. If the medallions represent those positions, we could replicate the sequence, Elijah finished. Cooper checked his watch. Holcomb will have men watching the hotel. We'll need a distraction. An hour later, they approached the Evergreen from the forest side, avoiding the main road where a black SUV sat parked, its occupants vigilant. Cooper had arranged for deputies to report a disturbance at Holcomb's bank. Nothing serious, but enough to draw attention away from the hotel. Inside, the trapdoor revealed water-damaged, but passable access to the chambers below. The air smelled of damp stone and something metallic. Their lights caught new watermarks on the walls, showing how close the flood had come to filling the entire system. The mechanisms held, Elijah observed, examining the drainage controls as they passed. Barely. The ceremonial chamber showed signs of hasty excavation, emptied alcoves, disturbed artifacts, muddy footprint, but the circle of stone chairs remained intact, their carved symbols still clearly visible. Behind the largest chair, Blackwood's seat, they found what they sought, a section of wall with faint seams indicating a doorway. No visible handle or lock, Cooper noted, running his flashlight along the edges. Margaret pointed to 13 small depressions arranged in a circle on the wall's surface. Medallion positions, each would be placed according to the ceremony's requirement. Hannah consulted the Book of Stars, comparing its diagrams to the wall. The positions changed depending on the date. Certain configurations for certain purposes. What date would open the vault? Elijah wondered. March 15, 1889. Margaret replied without hesitation. The night of the incident, the last time the full circle gathered. With trembling fingers, she helped Hannah find the corresponding chart in the book. Together, they identified the positions required for each medallion. We have 2 actual medallions, Elijah said, placing them in their proper depressions. For the rest, he carefully positioned the brass compass at different points on the wall, aligning its needle with the symbols shown in the book. At each position, they heard a faint click from within the mechanism. The process was painstaking, requiring precise alignment and steady hands. Last one, Hannah whispered after nearly 30 minutes of tense work. When the final position was set, they held their breath, but nothing happened. Something's missing, Cooper said. Frustration evident. Margaret studied the wall thoughtfully. The sacrifice. What? Hannah asked. Sophia Blackwood's journal mentioned a sacrifice required for certain chambers. Not blood, she clarified quickly, but something personal, something valuable. Elijah examined the central depression in the wall, larger than the others, and differently shaped. The golden rod from the leader's chair. Victor took it. Maybe not the only one, Margaret suggested. She removed a locket from around her neck, opening it to reveal not a photograph, but a small golden key with star-shaped teeth. Sophia Blackwood's passed down through the women in town, who kept the secrets. The key fit perfectly in the central depression. When Margaret turned it, the ancient mechanism groaned to life. Stone ground against stone as the wall slowly receded, revealing darkness beyond. The vault door itself was magnificent, a massive circular portal of steel and brass, more sophisticated than anything that should have existed in the 1880s. Its surface featured intricate astronomical designs surrounding a complex locking mechanism with multiple rotating rings. It's a combination lock, Elijah breathed, studying the symbols. based on celestial alignments, like a giant version of the compass, Hannah added, photographing the incredible craftsmanship. As they contemplated how to proceed, a familiar voice echoed from the passage behind them. "I knew you'd lead us to it eventually." They turned to find Victor, standing in the chamber entrance, flanked by armed men. Behind them, looking both triumphant and strangely apprehensive, stood Raymond Holcomb. The ceremonial chamber had become a tableau of frozen tension. Victor's men covered the group with their weapons, while Holcomb approached the vault door with undisguised reverence. "Magnificent," he murmured, eyeing his fingers over the intricate mechanisms. "My great-grandfather described it, but seeing it, he turned to Elijah with something like genuine gratitude. "I should thank you. We've been searching for decades." Cooper kept his hand near his holstered gun. "This doesn't belong to you, Raymond." "On the contrary," Holcomb replied. "My family has protected these secrets for generations." He nodded to Victor, who produced the golden rod they had seen earlier. "The key of stars, the final component." Margaret stepped forward, despite Hannah's attempt to restrain her. "Protected? You've hoarded what should have been known. People died. My grandfather, Cooper's, all those miners. The truth deserves light." Holcomb's expression softened momentarily. "Miss Sullivan, there are truths too dangerous for public consumption." The circle understood this. He inserted the rod into the central mechanism of the vault door. The astronomical rings began to rotate, aligning themselves according to some preset pattern. With each click, the massive door inched open, ancient gears turning with surprising smoothness. "Cover them," Holcomb instructed Victor, "but no unnecessary violence. They've earned the right to witness this." The vault door completed its opening sequence with a sonorous boom that reverberated through the chamber. Beyond lay not a room but a short corridor leading to another chamber, this one hewn directly from the living rock of the mountain. Holcomb produced an electric lantern that illuminated the space beyond. "After you," he said to Elijah with unexpected courtesy. "You found it after all." With little choice, they proceeded into the vault. The inner chamber was smaller than expected, perhaps 20 feet square. Instead of gold or treasure, its walls were lined with shelves containing leather-bound ledgers, geological samples, and correspondence, all meticulously organized and preserved, despite the passing decades. "Records," Hannah whispered, scanning the shelves. "Not gold. Gold was merely a means to an end." Holcomb replied, "The circle's true purpose was power and knowledge." At the center of the room stood a glass case containing a small golden statue, a miner holding a lantern, exquisitely detailed. Beside it lay a collection of documents, sealed with wax, imprinted with the circle's emblem. As Victor's men began photographing and cataloging the contents, Elijah studied the documents closest to him. What he found turned his blood cold. "These are records of murder," he said, his voice echoing in the small space. "Systematic elimination of claim holders who found something in their minds, something Blackwood wanted." Cooper had found another ledger. Financial records, payments to officials, judges, even territorial governors. He looked up grimly. "Your family fortune was built on blood money, Holcomb." Raymond seemed unfazed. "Empire building requires difficult choices." The circle did what was necessary to secure Pinecrest's future, and their own. Margaret had discovered a collection of personal journals. These belonged to the disappeared miners. They were documenting everything. Her eyes filled with tears as she recognized her grandfather's handwriting. They were planning to expose the circle when they vanished. Holcomb's patience was wearing thin. "Enough reminiscing. Victor, secure the statue and the primary documents. We'll return for the rest." "You can't take these," Hannah protested. "They're historical evidence of crimes. Crimes well beyond any statute of limitations," Holcomb replied smoothly. "Besides, possession is 9/10 of the law, Miss Pearson." As Victor carefully removed the golden statue from its case, Elijah noticed something unusual. "Wait, it's hollow." Indeed, The bottom of the statue contained a hidden compartment. Inside was a folded map, its yellowed paper covered with annotations in Blackwood's distinctive hand. The actual gold cache, Cooper realized, examining the map over Elijah's shoulder. Not in the hotel at all, but in a separate mine shaft entirely. Holcomb's expression darkened. "That's private property, Sheriff. Hand it over." "This belongs to the town," Elijah countered. "Everything here does. Evidence of how Blackwood and your ancestors stole land, murdered miners, and built their fortune on corruption. My ancestors built this town when it was nothing but mud and desperate men." Holcomb snapped, his cultivated veneer cracking. "The circle brought order, prosperity, civilization. The ends justified the means." "Not to the families of the men who died," Margaret said quietly. "Not to the generations who've lived under your family's thumb." The standoff might have continued, but a low rumble interrupted them, a tremor that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. Water began seeping through cracks in the far wall. The drainage controls, Elijah realized. "They're failing." Victor looked alarmed. "We need to leave now." "Not without the documents," Hannah insisted, already gathering journals into her backpack. Holcomb hesitated only briefly before making a decision. "Take the statue and the map," he instructed Victor. "Leave the rest." "Raymond," Victor protested. "These records mean nothing without context." Holcomb's cold calculation had returned. "Let them have the past. We have the future." He tapped the map in Victor's hand. Another tremor, stronger this time, sent a crack zigzagging across the chamber ceiling. "Out, now," Cooper ordered, helping Margaret gather what documents they could. As water began pooling around their feet, they made a desperate dash toward the exit, carrying the evidence of a century-old conspiracy finally exposed to the light of day. Water sloshed around their ankles as they fled through the ceremonial chamber, its ancient floor now submerged beneath 2 inches of steadily rising groundwater. The tremors continued, stronger and more frequent, dislodging small stones from the ceiling. "The main passage should still be clear," Elijah called over his shoulder, leading the group with his lantern held high. Behind them came Margaret and Hannah, carrying backpacks bulging with rescued documents. Cooper brought up the rear, occasionally turning to check on Holcomb and his men, who followed at a distance, Victor clutching the golden statue and map. "The whole system is destabilizing," Cooper shouted as another tremor shook dust from the walls. Decades of mining weakened the mountain's structure. This flood could be the tipping point. They reached the natural cavern with its glowing mineral deposits, now partially submerged under the swollen underground stream. The water moved with frightening speed, carrying debris from collapsed sections further in the mountain. The drainage controls, Elijah veered toward the brass mechanism they'd discovered earlier. "If I can reroute the flow again." "No time," Cooper grabbed his arm. "That whole wall looks ready to go." Indeed, the rock face housing the controls showed ominous cracks, water spraying through in pressurized jets. As they watched, a section of ceiling collapsed nearby, narrowly missing Hannah. "Move!" Holcomb's voice cut through the chaos. "The main tunnel now." They splashed through deepening water toward the passage leading back to the hotel. Halfway there, Victor suddenly shouted and pointed to a side tunnel they hadn't noticed before. A maintenance passage, similar to their earlier escape route. "That way. It's a more direct path to the surface." Cooper hesitated. "We don't know where it leads." "I do," Holcomb countered. "My family's maps. It emerges near the old mining office, half a mile from the hotel." Another violent tremor decided the matter, collapsing part of their original route. With no choice, the unified group plunged into the narrow side passage, forced into single file by its tight confines. The tunnel sloped upward, which gave them hope, but water still flowed around their feet, suggesting connections to the flooding chambers below. Their lights cast eerie shadows as they stumbled forward, the sounds of collapse growing more distant. After several hundred yards, the passage widened into a small antechamber with multiple exits. Ancient mining equipment rusted against the walls, pickaxes, carts, and what appeared to be primitive blasting apparatus. "Which way?" Elijah demanded, turning to Holcomb. The banker studied the diverging paths, momentary uncertainty crossing his face. "The right fork, I believe." "You believe?" Hannah challenged. "These passages weren't in regular use even in my grandfather's time." Holcomb snapped. "But yes, the right fork ascends toward the surface." As they argued, Victor had moved to one side, examining the old mining equipment with unusual interest. Cooper noticed him handling what looked like sticks of dynamite, their wrappings deteriorated, but contents possibly still viable. "What are you doing?" the sheriff demanded. Victor straightened, a cold calculation in his eyes. "Insurance." He held up the golden statue. "This and the map are what matter. The rest is liability." Understanding dawned on Cooper's face. "He's going to collapse the tunnel, bury the evidence, and us with it." Holcomb looked genuinely shocked. "Victor, that's not the plan. These people don't need to." "Wake up, Raymond," Victor snarled. "They have enough evidence to destroy everything your family built. Your ancestors would have handled this decisively." "By murdering 4 people?" Margaret challenged, her voice stronger than her frail frame suggested. "Just like they murdered my grandfather and the others." "Progress requires sacrifice," Victor replied without remorse. He had assembled a primitive but effective explosive device using the ancient materials. Nothing personal. Cooper drew his service weapon. "Put it down, now." Victor smiled without humor. "You won't risk a shot with unstable explosives, Sheriff." A tense standoff ensued, broken by another violent tremor that nearly knocked them off their feet. In the confusion, Elijah lunged for Victor, grappling for control of the improvised device. "Stop them!" Victor shouted to his men. What followed was chaos. Cooper engaging the other men, Hannah pulling Margaret to safety, Holcomb frozen in indecision. The explosive tumbled from Victor's grasp, rolling toward one of the passage walls. "Get down!" Cooper roared an instant before the device detonated. The blast was deafening in the confined space, instantly collapsing one tunnel and sending cracks racing through the ceiling of the antechamber. Rock and debris rained down as the ancient timber supports gave way. In the dust and darkness that followed, Elijah found himself pinned behind fallen rock, separated from the others. Through a small gap, he could see Hannah helping Margaret toward the right passage, Cooper covering their retreat. Of Victor and his men, there was no sign, only more debris where they had been standing. A pained groan came from nearby. By the beam of his damaged flashlight, Elijah saw Holcomb trapped beneath a fallen support beam, blood streaming from a head wound. Despite everything, Elijah couldn't leave him to die. Squeezing through the gap, he managed to reach the injured man. "Why?" Holcomb whispered, as Elijah worked to free him. "After what my family, because that's the difference between us," Elijah replied, straining against the beam's weight. As he finally shifted the timber, Holcomb reached inside his jacket and pressed something into Elijah's hand. A sealed letter, its edges yellowed with age, bearing Blackwood's personal seal. "He left this for whoever found the vault," Holcomb gasped. "My family kept it hidden all these years. Maybe it's time." Another section of ceiling gave way before he could finish, forcing them to trundle toward the remaining open passage. The mountain itself seemed determined to reclaim its secrets, burying the chambers that had held them for over a century. Sunrise painted the mountains gold as emergency vehicles crowded the old mining access road. Paramedics tended to the injured, while search and rescue teams probed the partially collapsed tunnel entrance, looking for any sign of Victor and his men. Elijah sat on the tailgate of Cooper's truck, a thermal blanket around his shoulders, watching as Hannah spoke with reporters who had somehow already gotten wind of the story. Margaret Sullivan sat nearby, her frail hands protectively cradling the backpack full of recovered documents. "They're calling it a miracle," Cooper said, joining Elijah with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "Everyone making it out except Victor and his crew. Any sign of them?" Cooper shook his head. "County rescue team says that section is completely sealed. Ground-penetrating radar shows massive collapse at least 100 feet in. Even if they survive the initial explosion." He didn't need to finish the thought. Holcomb sat alone in an ambulance, head bandaged, his usual commanding presence diminished. The golden statue and map had been recovered, now secured in Cooper's vehicle as evidence. "What happens now?" Elijah asked. "State investigators are already on their way. Federal too, most likely." Cooper sipped his coffee. "Some of those documents show corruption reaching to the governor's office, even if it was 40 years ago. Historic conspiracy cases fascinate prosecutors. No living defendants to fight back." Hannah approached, recorder in hand but turned off. "National outlets are picking up the story. Secret Society's century of corruption exposed. Margaret's been telling them about her grandfather and the other miners who disappeared. And Holcomb, cooperating. Surprisingly, his lawyers negotiating some kind of immunity deal in exchange for access to family records." She nodded toward the bandaged banker. "Almost dying in that tunnel seems to have affected him." Elijah fingered the sealed letter in his pocket. Blackwood's final testimony, which he hadn't yet shared with the other. He had read it by flashlight during their long wait for rescue, and its contents weighed heavily on his mind. 3 weeks later, Pinecrest had transformed. Media attention had brought an influx of visitors, curious about the town with the secret society and the hotel with hidden chambers. The Evergreen Hotel stood cordoned off with official tape, structural engineers assessing whether the underground collapses had compromised its foundation. In the town hall, a makeshift museum had been established. Glass cases displayed the recovered documents, the golden medallions, and photographs of the chambers now forever sealed beneath the mountain. Margaret Sullivan had been appointed official historian, her lifetime of preserving secrets now reversed, as she shared the true story with all who would listen. "The County Historical Society is sending archivists," she told Elijah as they stood before a display of her grandfather's journal. "These records will be properly preserved for future generations." At the center of the exhibit stood the golden miner statue, now property of the town following Holcomb's formal renunciation of any claim to it. The map it had contained led to an abandoned shaft miles from town, a project for future exploration once proper permissions were secured. Elijah found Hannah outside, taking photographs of the hotel against the sunset. "Got an offer from the Denver Post," she said without preamble. "Full-time investigative reporter. You'll take it, thinking about it." She lowered her camera. "What about you? 6 different restoration companies have tried to hire you since the story broke." He smiled, looking up at the weathered facade of the Evergreen. "I already have a job. The hotel's structurally compromised. They might tear it down. Not if I have anything to say about it." Later that evening, the town council convened a special session. The meeting room overflowed with residents and media, an energy of renewal permeating the crowd. Elijah stood before them, architectural plans spread across the table. The engineers confirmed that while the underground chambers have collapsed, the hotel's main foundation remains sound. He explained, "With proper reinforcement, the Evergreen can be fully restored." "The cost would be prohibitive," objected one councilman. Sheriff Cooper stood. "Not necessarily." He gestured toward the back of the room where Raymond Holcomb entered, looking older but somehow unburdened. "My family owes a debt to this town," Holcomb said simply. "I'm establishing a trust fund for the hotel's restoration and conversion into a proper historical museum. The full amount required, no strings attached." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Why?" someone called out. Holcomb met Elijah's gaze. "Because some foundations need to be rebuilt honestly." 1 year later, Elijah stood on the porch of the newly restored Evergreen Hotel, now renamed the Blackwood Truth Historical Museum. Its fresh paint gleamed in the summer sun, the carefully repaired woodwork showcasing the craftsmanship of both past and present. Tourists and townspeople mingled on the lawn, awaiting the grand opening. Margaret sat in a place of honor, her silver hair crowned with wildflowers. Hannah, home from Denver for the occasion, documented everything with her camera. As Elijah prepared to cut the ribbon, he felt the weight of Blackwood's letter in his pocket, the confession of a man who had realized too late the consequences of his ambition, who had hidden evidence of both crimes and redemption in hopes that someday, Someone would uncover the truth and make it right. The scissors flashed in the sunlight, the ribbon fell away, and the doors of the Evergreen opened once more, not to hide history but to illuminate it.